This program is brought to you by Emory University.
By the time of his death in November of 2012, Marvin Miller, the economist and labor organizer and former executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association, would have known that he, more than anyone else, had been responsible for raising the salaries of Major League Baseball players from an average of $19,000 in 1966 to more than $3.2 million in 2012. And if Miller himself tended to downplay the role he played in strengthening the players' rights vis-à-vis baseball's owners, thereby paving the way for the players to demand and to receive vastly greater sums of money for their labor, others were less reluctant to celebrate his achievement. Miller, by some accounts, was the Moses who led baseball's children of Israel out of the land of bondage. The belief is widespread that before the modern era of free agency, salary arbitration, and work stoppages, baseball players were not fairly compensated for their talents and labor. Al Stump's biography of Ty Cobb, a biography, is typical. Stump is writing about the players' salaries in the early decades of the 20th century. To refer to, quotes, poorly paid baseball players, he said, was a tautology. Good hitters and pitchers died broke. Pensions did not exist. Salary arbitration had not been invented. Boys off a hay farm wagon with a sketchy education were far outmatched when bargaining against avaricious franchise holders controlling one of the more shameless monopolies in the history of American commerce. Stump's summary makes it sound as if the players in baseball's golden era had neither brains nor backbone when it came to dealing with their owners. This seems to me to do ball players of that time a great disservice. It's condescending in the way that British staff officers of the same era considered enlisted soldiers to be an unorganized rabble whose chief characteristics were innocence and a general lack of imagination. Were baseball owners as a group hard-nosed, even ruthless in their negotiations with their workers? Of course, they were capitalists. What do you expect? Did players want more money? Of course, they were employees. Have you ever met an employee who didn't think he or she deserved to be paid more for their work? The better question is whether baseball players were seriously underpaid for the times. Here the answer is not a simple yes or no. It depends in large part on your assessment of a professional athlete's worth in quotes, in a democratic society, and also on your philosophy of wage distribution in a market economy. Let's look at the record. Here are a few typical players and typical numbers. Al Bridwell began his baseball career playing for the Columbus, Ohio Senators, a minor league team. His salary in 1902 was $150 a month, about $900 for a 6-month season. As Bridwell tells it, when he heard the offer, I almost jumped out of my chair. At the time, he says, he was making something like $150 a year selling shoes. 3 years later, with the Cincinnati Reds, Bridwell would make $2,100 for the same 6 months' work. Another player from the same era was Tommy Leach, who in 1899 played for the Louisville Colonels, later the Pittsburgh Pirates. Playing third base for the Colonels, Leach, like Bridwell, received about $150 a month, $5 a day. This at a time when union carpenters in Chicago earned $2.80 for an 8-hour day, while their non-union counterparts in the South were paid as little as $1.25 daily for the same effort. Consider Harry Hooper, who held a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from St. Mary's College and worked after graduation in 1907 as a surveyor for the Western Pacific Railroad for $75 a month. When he wasn't surveying for the railroad, he was playing club baseball for Alameda in the California State League, making $85 monthly. When he signed with the Boston Red Sox the following year, he was offered a contract for $2,800. It's certainly true that baseball owners were often penurious and calculating in their dealings with their employees. Still, even during the leanest of years and working for the meanest of owners, baseball players were by comparison paid handsomely for their labor. Perhaps the single best insight into the players' own view of their working conditions was given almost incidentally by Charles Old Hoss Radburn, a pitcher for the Providence Grays and the Boston Bean Eaters. Radburn was signed initially by the Grays in 1881 for a salary reported to be between $1,100 and $1,400. Both pitching and playing shortstop, Radburn had a good year. As a pitcher, he won 25 of 36 games, completing 34 of them. In 1882, his record was even better, and at the end of the season, Radburn asked for, and received, a raise to $2,000, which was increased further to $2,500 by the close of his third year with the Grays. When, in the middle of the 1880s, Radburn was asked by a reporter for the New York Clipper whether he didn't find it tiring to pitch a complete game every other day, week in and week out, Radburn replied, "Tire out tossing a little 5-ounce baseball for 2 hours? Man, I used to be a butcher. From 4 in the morning until 8 at night, I knocked down steers with a 25-pound sledge. Tired from playing 2 hours a day for 10 times the money I used to get for 16 hours a day?" There are many similar testimonials. The truth is that even during the years when the infamous reserve clause kept players tethered to a club until they were traded or waived by the owners, playing baseball beat just about all other occupations then open to the majority of American men, and beat them by a wide margin. Here's George Gibson, who played for the Pirates and the Giants from 1905 to 1918. "I didn't get paid much, but it sure beat hauling bricks. See, it was a choice between working all day long on one of Dad's construction jobs or having every day a holiday, playing ball." Baseball was especially lucrative for men who belonged to racial or ethnic minorities who were otherwise subjected to cruel discriminations. For those lucky few men who were good enough, baseball then, as it does even now, opened the door to a better life. After briefly attending Dartmouth, where he was recruited to play baseball, John "Chief" Myers played baseball from 1908 to 1915 for the New York Giants. He also played for the Boston Braves and the Brooklyn Robins. Myers was a good player, but by no means a superstar. In interviews, he claimed that during his era, men played just for the love of it, rather than for money. "We played for practically nothing," Myers said. "My top was about $6,000. Myers' wages sound puny when measured against today's salaries, and of course they are. In 1922, Babe Ruth, far and away the best paid player in baseball, negotiated a contract from Yankees co-owners Jake Ruppert and Tillinghast Houston. The two colonels, Houston had served in the Army in World War I, Ruppert in the National Guard, the two colonels paid Ruth $1,000 a week, $52,000 a year. The next highest player that year, Frank Home Run Baker, made only $16,000. Expressed in terms of modern dollars, it sounds as if the Babe was being robbed. In 2005, you would have needed only about $567,000 to buy what Babe Ruth's salary bought him in 1922. But compare the wages paid at that time to baseball players, to workers in other professions. Then Chief Myers' complaint, "We paid for practically nothing," sounds less accurate. In 1908, for example, university professors at the top of the pay scale in elite institutions made between $2,300 and $28 annually. At lesser institutions, salaries ranged from $200 to $1,300 for a year's work. This at a time when the poverty level for a family living in New York hovered around $800. One hopes that those teachers, like the baseball players, also labored for love. A study of the relations between labor and management in baseball during the dead ball era uncovers numerous abuses by the owners. That's true. The men who paid the bills did not hesitate to fine their players for misconduct or to blacklist them. The owners commonly relied on the notorious reserve clause, which in effect prevented a player from signing with another team, so long as the club that owned his contract exercised its option to reserve the right to his labor. A few owners, like White Sox owner Charles Comiskey, treated players with stinginess, if not outright ill will. Some historians even lay part of the blame for the 1919 World Series fix at the feet of Comiskey, who was well known for cheapness in dealing with players. But studying baseball's labor relations also shows that during the period from 1890 to 1920, the game was amazingly free of the violent and often deadly clashes between workers and management that arose during that time in American labor history. The explanation for baseball's relative harmony, as distinct from almost every other major industry or business of that period, can only be that baseball players were doing what they liked and were relatively well paid to do it. As Harold Seymour and Dorothy Seymour put it, even the poorest played among them, baseball players, was probably too comfortably fixed to turn to violence. But even in heaven, some of the angels were dissatisfied, and baseball players often griped that their salaries were only for half a year's work. They complained that they had no other source of income during the rest of the year when they weren't being paid to play baseball. This was certainly true, while nothing prevented them from seeking other ways to make money from October through February. Players were free to make money however they chose after the season ended, and in fact most players took second jobs during the off-season. Even those who were better paid found it useful to supplement their baseball incomes over the winter. Players in the early decades of the 20th century commonly embarked on exhibition tours after the close of the regular season. These were always lucrative opportunities, especially for players on pennant-winning teams who could reenact the World Series, as it were, in rural towns where news of the games arrived always belatedly and often incompletely. Babe Ruth in 1919 and again in 1920 more than doubled his annual salary by participating in such tours. But even lesser players on second division teams could make good money barnstorming.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.